Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A December morning. The kind of morning where the air cuts your cheeks like invisible blades, and even the silence seems frozen. The wind whistled between the red brick and glass buildings, rushing into the smallest gaps, stirring up swirls of dead leaves and crumpled paper. Passers-by, bundled up in their heavy coats, shoulders hunched, bowed their heads to protect themselves from the bite of winter. Muffled horns and hurried footsteps echoed on the wet concrete, punctuating a city already in motion even though the sun had not yet pierced the thick layer of gray clouds. It was barely 7:30 a.m., but the sidewalks were already black with people. Lines formed in front of the still-open coffee shops, the steam from their mouths mingling with that escaping from steaming cups. The acrid smell of coffee, toast, and diesel hung in the air. The sky, meanwhile, bore that dull, dirty hue of days when snow threatens but doesn't fall, that heavy expectation hanging over the rooftops. Among this morning crowd, Jason Miller, 27, strode forward, his cheap shoes occasionally slipping on the icy sidewalk. He wore a slightly faded navy suit, bought secondhand at a thrift store in East Orange, but perfectly pressed the day before with the help of an old steam iron borrowed from his neighbor. His tie was slightly askew, his bare hands reddened from the cold. His heart was beating fast, not only because of the biting cold, but also because he had an appointment in less than 30 minutes at the top of an office tower for a job interview at Carterlogics, a logistics company he had admired for years. It was perhaps his only chance to escape the precariousness in which he had stagnated for too long. Jason hadn't had it easy. Orphaned at 15, he'd been taken in by his grandmother, a strong woman with a tender heart, who raised him in a small, modest apartment above a laundromat. She'd taught him dignity, even when life dealt you a blow. He'd studied at night, worked during the day, window washer, delivery boy, cashier, anything to pay for his books and keep the fridge half full. Today, he stood tall, with that gleam in his eyes of someone who expects nothing but hopes for everything. Suddenly, his gaze was drawn to a bus stop on Broad Avenue. On a metal bench, a woman was sitting alone. She wore a simple gray cardigan, far too light for this temperature. Her fingers trembled, her lips were blue, her cheeks flushed to the bone by the wind. A battered suitcase lay at her feet, and her eyes stared into space as if she were absent from her own body. Passers-by skirted around her as if she were part of the street furniture, an annoying obstacle on their way to their duties. Some glanced furtively, but no one stopped. In this business district, people moved quickly, and the all-too-visible distress became invisible through indifference. Jason, however, stopped. He stood frozen for a second, then slowly approached. It wasn't pity that drove him to act, nor a chivalrous impulse. It was the memory of the cold. He remembered those winters spent without heat when the gas had been cut off. He knew what it was like to have fingers so frozen you couldn't open a bottle of water. And above all, he knew what it was like to be ignored when you needed a simple gesture, a human look. "I have it," he said softly, crouching down in front of her. The woman turned her head slowly, her eyes slightly misty with tears that had not yet fallen. She seemed surprised to be addressed. Jason, without waiting for an answer, took off his own jacket. It wasn't very warm, a black mid-season jacket, but it was better than nothing. He slipped it over his shoulders with an almost brotherly delicacy. "You will freeze," she whispered, her voice broken by the cold and emotion. "I'll get through this," he replied with a reassuring smile. "You need it more than I do." She hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she closed the jacket around herself, as if she feared profaning an act too pure. Jason reached into his inside trouser pocket and pulled out a small bag of nuts he was saving for the morning. He handed it to her without saying a word. "Take care of yourself, okay?" He didn't wait for thanks or an explanation. He didn't ask her name or what she was doing there. He just gave her one last, almost silent look and set off again, his teeth clenched against the cold, his arms crossed for warmth, but his heart strangely warmer than before. He didn't know that this moment had just changed the course of his life. Madeline Carter remained seated on that cold bench, wrapped in the oversized jacket the young man had just given her. She watched his back quickly recede, his hurried steps swallowed up by the dense, indifferent crowd of Newark. Each stride seemed to erase a little more of that fragment of humanity she had thought lost. Her heart pounded, a mixture of astonishment, gratitude, and an emotion she hadn't felt for a long time. That morning, Madeline hadn't chosen to go out like this, without a coat or gloves, wearing only a simple cardigan she had grabbed hastily. An impulsive, almost thoughtless decision. The night before, she had received a phone call that had turned her private life upside down. Cruel, painful news that had awakened a dull pain and a loneliness that she had carried like a shadow since the death of her husband 2 years earlier. Widowed young, Madeline found herself alone at the head of Cartologics, a thriving business, but one that weighed heavily on his shoulders. She now lived in a luxurious apartment in the heart of the city, with a panoramic view of the harbor and the glittering buildings. Yet this luxury didn't fill the emptiness that sometimes grew inside her. She had always strived to wear a mask of efficiency, coldness, and total control. But this morning, she had fled her glass and steel offices, her teams of suited and tied executives, her relentless decisions, and her endless numbers. She wanted to feel, just for a moment, the raw, imperfect reality of life pounding beneath her feet on these rough, working-class streets. Madeline was well aware of the misunderstanding that could arise at the sight of her, poorly dressed in this cold and austere neighborhood. Several passers-by had eyed her suspiciously. Some had even ignored her, taking her for just another homeless person among many others. And yet, she was the one signing the checks for the hundreds of employees who ensured the smooth flow of goods up and down the East Coast every day. She had seen that distant look, that silent judgment, and wondered how many times she herself had let someone in need pass by without a gesture, without a glance. Then there was Jason, this young man she had just passed, who, without a word, had taken off his jacket to offer it to her. This simple and discreet gesture had broken the shell she had built for herself. He was proof that, despite the apparent harshness of the world, there were still pockets of human warmth, flashes of genuine kindness. Madeline felt her eyes moisten, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not now. She clutched the jacket to her, as if holding back a fragile breath of hope. A hope she hadn't felt in a long time. This young man had just given her more than a piece of clothing. He had given her a sign that compassion could cross social barriers, that human dignity was not a privilege reserved for a few. This morning, Madeline understood that true power resides not in high offices or cold decisions, but in those moments when we reach out, when we choose to see the other, to be present, simply human. She knew her life was going to change from that moment on, but she didn't know how yet. 2 days later, as Jason finished a long day at a small downtown cafe, his phone vibrated on the table. He answered without much expectation. "Hello, this is Cartologics Human Resources," a calm voice began. "We'd like to offer you a second interview following your online application. The general manager has personally requested a meeting with you." Jason stood there for a moment, his heart racing. Cartologics. The name had long conjured up images of a world he hadn't dared hope to enter. He'd sent his resume to the company a few weeks earlier, but never received a single response. Had he misread it? Was it a mistake? "Yes, of course," he replied, regaining his composure. "It would be an honor." The next day, he found himself in front of the imposing glass tower that housed Cartologics' headquarters, in the heart of Newark's financial district. His suit, though simple and a little worn, had been carefully pressed. He took the elevator, which quickly rose to the 45th floor, where this potentially life-changing opportunity awaited him. He was led into a spacious office, bathed in natural light thanks to a floor-to-ceiling window offering a spectacular view of the city. Behind a large, dark wooden desk, a woman stood up to greet him. "Hello, Jason," she said with a warm smile. He looked at her, puzzled for a moment. "You may not recognize me." Jason squinted, searching his memory. Then it came to light. "That was you at the bus stop," he whispered, a hint of emotion in his voice. Madeline nodded. "Yes," she replied softly. "That day, I saw something in you. Something that reminded me of what it means to be human." She stood up and took a few steps to approach the window. "I'm not going to lie to you, Jason. These days have been difficult. I lost my husband 2 years ago. Since then, I've sometimes doubted the meaning of it all, the compassion in this fast-moving world that often seems to forget the most vulnerable." Jason listened, captivated by the sincerity in her voice. That morning, when you gave me your jacket, you gave me more than just clothing. You gave me hope, a reminder. And I want you to know that I want to give you a real chance here. Not just a job, but a career. Because that's what you deserve. A mixture of astonishment and gratitude passed through Jason. He nodded, moved. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will not disappoint you. The following weeks were intense. Jason began as a logistics assistant, immersed in the complex workings of the company. Madeline monitored his progress closely, taking him under her wing with kindness and rigor. He worked tirelessly, learning quickly, proposing new solutions, and gradually earning the respect of his colleagues. In 2 years, he rose through the ranks, supervisor, then regional director. His loyalty, humility, and intelligence made him a natural leader, appreciated and listened to. To every important meeting, he now wore a plain black jacket, a gift from Madeline. As a reminder of the day, a simple act of kindness changed the course of his life. This jacket wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol, a constant reminder that compassion can open doors where degrees alone aren't enough. 5 years later, the CarterLogix boardroom was filled with familiar faces and select guests. The atmosphere was solemn, tinged with palpable emotion. Executives, shareholders, and longtime partners had gathered for a historic moment. Madeline Carter, elegant in a simple suit, but bearing in her eyes all the wisdom and fatigue accumulated over the years, stood before the lectern. Her voice, firm but tinged with an unusual gentleness, echoed through the room. Today, after more than 20 years at the helm of CarterLogix, I officially announce my retirement. A low murmur ran through the assembly. Madeline paused, then continued. I'm leaving this company in good hands. Hands capable of understanding not only the complexity of business, but above all the human value that lies at the heart of our mission. Jason Miller embodies these values. She paused, letting the words sink in. Jason didn't get here through connections, nor because of inherited privileges. He got here by giving his jacket to a freezing woman one December morning, expecting nothing in return. That simple, human gesture revealed a kindness of heart that many seek in vain in this business world. Thunderous applause erupted in the room. All eyes turned to Jason, who sat modestly in the front row, visibly moved, his face lit up by a humble but proud smile. In the days that followed, the media seized on the story, calling it a movie-worthy success story. It told how a young man with no connections or fortune had risen through the ranks thanks to his integrity and kindness. For some, it was an inspiring tale, for others, a symbol of hope. But for Jason, it was simply life taking its natural course. On the day of his first speech as the new CEO, Jason took the stage in front of the entire CarterLogix team. The spotlights highlighted his determined, yet deeply sincere face. A small gesture, he said, can change a life. Not just the life of the person being helped, but our own. This world desperately needs more people reaching out, even when they have almost nothing to offer. That's what I want to build here. A company founded on kindness, listening, and equality. Later, in a modest neighborhood of Newark, a new training center opened its doors. Founded by CarterLogix under Jason's leadership, the center's mission was to provide young people from disadvantaged backgrounds with the means to train for careers in logistics and transportation. Above the entrance, a shiny plaque bore this inscription. This center is dedicated to those who, like Jason Miller, choose kindness even in the face of adversity. Every time a student walked through those doors, they carried with them the story of a man who once offered his jacket to a stranger in the cold. A story that reminded us that greatness is not measured by wealth, but by the capacity to be human.